are competing with that on the video, so you need to, if it's going, you need to speak up.
Okay.
It's hard for the camera to discern what your voice is from the,
Oh, you're doing it.
the rest of us.
You're doing it.
Yeah, she's been doing it.
Yeah, it's on.
Trying to, and I
Oh,
just.
it is.
Yeah, all you have to do
Oh, I
is,
thought we talked to it.
all you have to do is
You
search.
turn around and wave.
Yeah, well, I don't, but I'll just put it up here in case Mary Ann or you want to do it.
Oh, good.
Okay,
It's on. I'm gonna do it, then I'm gonna erase it. Okay.
sounds good.
All right. So.
All right, no, what do you?
And then I'm gonna erase it. I'm gonna tell them how to find the videos.
Oh, okay, sorry.
All right, the videos are on YouTube.com.
I wasn't following.
All right. So that's where you go. Sorry. If you want to see Belinda's presentations on Revelations, YouTube.com. If you will just search Joe space Ellen space Morris, it's on my channel. Now, doesn't that sound very sophisticated? It's on my channel. But the truth is my
Sounds very
channel.
important.
Yeah, it's very important. But my channel is just the videos that I've recorded. So you're gonna find some personal videos. You can watch them, ignore them. It doesn't matter. But it's YouTube.com. And what it is Revelation through, and the through is THRU, to try and say, through Hebrew culture. And I tried very hard. I've got everything it says, it will say. And it's not, I've been here for chapter 11.
You can leave it. You can leave it.
I've been here for chapter 11, so it says dash chapter 11 part 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're really
And
not
I
gonna
would say it even went before chapter 11, doesn't
I
it?
don't know. Well, I might have 10 in there.
I was gonna say,
It might be there, but you're probably gonna need an external speaker on some of them because I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I have a camera, it's a phone, so I don't really know what I'm doing, and unfortunately I'm recording that I don't know what I'm doing right now, but you can erase it. But
okay, that's fine.
all right. So that's to find all the ones that you missed because you and I haven't seen each other before. So
yeah, so you can
I'm
go
fairly
back.
confident. Don't forget about the video.
The video.
The online video to watch about the two witnesses
Oh, yeah.
was called the Two Witnesses Movie.
Yeah.
And it really addresses,
And this has nothing to do with Joe Owen or this class, well, this part of this class, me teaching. There's another video on YouTube, and it's the Two Witnesses movie.
yeah.
Do you remember? It's like ACOS or something.
It's either AOC or COA. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I think it's
it's
COA.
like-
I think it's COA. But if you do Two Witnesses Movie, it
And
will
it's-
come up.
Yeah, and it's like letters and the O is little, just to
Yeah.
help you find it if you want to
And
look
it's
it up.
and the O is in the center. She missed that altogether.
Yes, I did.
It's either AOC or
missed it.
COA. I don't know which it is. I can't remember.
So go back and if you want to, go watch that because that kind of explains what we've been studying in chapter 11 about the two witnesses.
And who they are and who they
Because
aren't.
what we went through is we looked at Moses, Elijah, and Enoch. You know, why people say it has to be one of those three. And then what we did is we went back and studied Zechariah 3 and 4, and also chapter 6 has it in there too. We didn't do chapter 6 last time. But chapter 6 talks about the branch and how that's Jesus. And so because when you look at chapter 11 in Revelation, everybody just jumps on the two witnesses and why it has to be them. But if you go to, I believe it's verse 4 in Revelation 11,
Yes,
where it talks
verse
about these are the two olive trees and the two
Lamps.
lampstands are menorahs.
That stand before the Lord of the earth. So
Yes.
stand before the Lord.
So, and that's how come we go, so it's kind of like this. We all get stuck in trying to figure out who the two witnesses are, and Revelation tells us who the two witnesses are. It tells you to go look at it in Zechariah 3, 4, and 6 is kind of the way it is. So when you go and look at that, the two witnesses, they are these two guys. They have nothing to do with Moses and Elijah and Enoch. And so we also kind of dispelled why some people say, well, it has to be Enoch and Elijah because they never died and it's appointed to a man to die. That's not a good enough case. And the reason why we say that is the rapture. Do you have to die to go up in the rapture? It's going to be people who are living who are raptured up. People who are dead will be raised and raptured. The people who are alive will be caught up in the air, right? So you don't have to die to be raptured. So why does Enoch and Elijah have to be raptured? Here's the other argument for that. Is God promised them that they would never have to see death. That's what he told Elijah. God doesn't go back on his promise. So why would he say, I'll take you up, so this, I'm paraphrasing of course, it's Belinda's version. I'll take you up so you don't have to experience death, but thousands of years later I'm going to send you to earth to die. It would be terrible of God to do something like that.
You know, I've never heard that. That's a very good point.
Yeah,
Excellent point.
there's just a lot of these little things that just tell us, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's not going to be Moses and Elijah. I don't believe it is. I just don't believe it is. And those are some of those reasons why I don't believe it is. Or Enoch, yes.
It's not going to be a man.
Then we're going to look, so what I've been presenting is if it's not one of these three, who else can it be? And so one of the things that's why this movie came up. I don't totally agree with everything in this movie, but it gives you a different viewpoint of the two witnesses. And that's why I recommend this movie. Because, again, what I had stated is that my job is to get you thinking outside the box. Go study it and see what you think it is. Now, he said, I'll just give you a little idea. He says the two witnesses are Israel and the church. I don't totally agree with that. I think the two witnesses are the divided Israel. The two houses of Israel are the two tribes of Israel. You have the northern tribe and the southern tribe. And the southern tribe is the two, it's see if I get this right. It's the tribe of Judah.
David's tribe.
Right. David's tribe of Judah. It's Judah and Benjamin. And then you have the 10 lost tribes. And I'm not going to tell you who all those guys are. It's Reuben, Dan, Manasseh, Ephraim. And that's the tribe of Israel. And that's the lost tribe. God promised that he's going to restore that. And so I really believe in chapter 11, that's what we're seeing, is this restoration. Because when you look at Zechariah, these chapters in Zechariah, that's what God's talking about, restoring Jerusalem, right? And he's put these two men in a place of restoring Jerusalem. And I really believe that's what chapter 11 is talking about in Revelation, is this restoring and bringing back the people. Because when you look at the Old Testament and the prophets, everywhere, whether it's Ezekiel, Zechariah, Isaiah, Amos, I can't think of it, Jeremiah, God's always saying, I'm going to save a remnant. I'm going to cast you away, but I'm going to bring you back. I'm not going to forget the promises I've given you. Though I'm going to send you into captivity, I'm going to call you back. And all the land that you have lost is going to be restored to you. This is the promises of God. And so what you're seeing in Revelation 11 is it's still the same promise to the same people. Now, and I'll say this really quick. I will say that it is divided between the two. The tribe of Judah, or if you want, because the way it's split up, it's Judah and Israel, but also the Gentile nations. Because what the lost tribe, the lost 10 tribes, I feel like I'm stuttering over my words, is called the Gentiles. That's what the Jewish people, because Judah, the one that stayed and looked at them and they called them Gentiles. That's part of this division between them, because there's also that disdain, I'll use that word, why that popped up in my mind, but I'll use it anyway. This disdain between the two. Judah's like, we don't recognize you, you're gone, you're distant from us, you're Gentiles, because Gentiles were,
Your dogs.
yeah, less than, yeah, we don't like you.
Samaritans, they were.
Samaritans, yeah.
That's what I was thinking about, the Samaritans.
Yeah. Gentiles, we fit in that place as Christians. And that's the place that I kind of vary from this movie, is I don't consider it all the church, it's the lost 10 tribes in the church. Does that make sense? It's the Gentile nations. We are the Gentile nations, right? Some people say, and I don't disagree with this, that there's 3 divisions. There's Judah, there's the lost 10 tribes, and then there's the church. And they say, we're the middle part that brings them all together. It could be. It could be. But I still think if you want to lump us all in together into that Gentile group, you can do that too. So anyway,
So
that's
in here,
kind of
doesn't
where
it
we're
say
at.
something about the time of the Gentiles or something?
Yes.
I was trying to find it, so.
Verse 2. I believe it's verse 2.
Not measure the
Or
cord,
3.
for is given to the nations, and will trample, maybe it's 3. Doesn't say in 3 either, I don't know.
All the time, no, it just talks about being trampled by the Gentile.
Okay.
And when you go and you look up what I believe it's either Paul or Peter, I don't remember now, where he talks, it's Paul, talks about the fullness of the Gentiles in Romans. And so we view that fullness of the Gentiles as part of Revelation 11. And again, what is the fullness of the Gentiles, or the time of the Gentiles? You trace that back to Genesis 48, 19, I believe, it's 18, 19, something like that. And that's where Jacob is blessing Manasseh and Ephraim, and he crosses his hands, remember? And so he calls Ephraim the fullness of the Gentiles. He's going to be the one to bring in fullness of the Gentiles. Ephraim is also part of that lost 10 tribe. And actually, that's the one, when you read about the house of Ephraim or the house of Israel, that's the lost 10 tribe. So it all comes back into that place into chapter 11, even though it doesn't say it like that quite the same. Okay, any questions on this? Did I lose anybody?
I didn't know all 10 tribes were lost. I thought there was just a remnant or a piece of the tribes that were lost.
I don't know. I guess I don't understand the question.
Talking about
Because-
when Israel split north and south is what she's
Yeah.
talking about.
But I didn't know that whole one that split, the whole thing was lost. I thought
They
there was
went-
just a portion of them that, were someplace else.
Well, and suppose the way I read it in history is that as they divided off and they went off into the northern part of Israel, they even had their own temple. They had their own, that's the Samaritan part, but the Samaritans worshipped at a different mountain. They didn't worship at Mount Zion in Jerusalem. They're like, we can put God on this mountain. We'll build him a temple and an altar here. And at first they said, we won't even do sacrifices here. We'll just worship God on this mountain. We'll do sacrifices in Jerusalem. And so then they eventually started doing sacrifices there because they got comfortable at being away from Jerusalem. And that was the lost 10 tribes and part of the Samaritans. Why? Remember where, if you go back and read where Jesus meets the woman at the well, and if you go back and read that, that's what she's talking about. Well, our fathers told us that this is the mountain that we worship God. You don't worship at a different mountain. And that's what she's talking about there. And they were, because Judah and Benjamin were the ones that kept it perfectly, they kind of looked at beneath them. Does that make sense? You're not doing it right. And if you want to, go and,
Religious, but go ahead.
yeah, and
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
but if you want to, go back and study the parable of the prodigal son. Because we all get stuck on just the prodigal son. He's left. And it's great. It preaches good, left, and the father longed for him and looked for him forever because he wanted to forgive him and restore him back. And the son says, I'm not worthy to do anything but take care of your pigs, you know? And I'm like, why has he got pigs? He's Jewish. I never got that one. But he was just saying, I'm lowly of low. I don't expect anything good. And the father, what's the father do? He puts his robe on him. He puts his signet ring on him. He restores him back to an honor of sonship, which is a beautiful picture. But guess what we forget? The other son. What is the picture in that parable? Is that there's two sons to God's house. And what happens? He restores the one son, the lost 10 tribe, and restores him to full honor. And the other son, who stuck with him, Judah, is mad. How dare you do that? I've been here forever. You know, I've been the good son. So that's the same picture of the two houses too. We just don't preach it that way. We preach it as a salvation message, you know, it works. But you got to look at the other son. And that's God's picture too, because he's saying, I'm going to restore my whole house. I'm bringing them all back in. It is going to be a remnant. I'm not saying every Jewish person is going to be saved, just like every Gentile's not going to be saved. But God's repairing his house. He's bringing them all back in, the house back in. Does that make sense? Okay, any other questions? So I want to present this to you. And I'm a little nervous about presenting this to you. I was up till 1 o'clock in the morning looking at this stuff. Because this is a little, how do I want to say it? It's weird. But I want to, this has meant so much to me in understanding some of this stuff. And we don't get taught this stuff very much. So take it for what it is. This is not going to be church stuff. This is not going to be doctrine, theology stuff. But it is quite interesting. And you can say I'm a false teacher and walk out the door if you want to. I don't get my feelings hurt. But what I want to talk about is this idea, because one of the things that's always, and when I say always, years, I have looked at, because I've always looked at typology in the Bible. Everybody know what typology is? Typology is like how Moses represents Messiah, and how Joseph Joshua can represent Messiah, because he's a type of Messiah. He's not Messiah, but he's a type of Messiah, right? And the tabernacle in the wilderness was a type of the Garden of Eden, right? So that's kind of typology. Does that kind of help? Or did I get too out there? So I've always kind of looked at typology, and I keep seeing these threes. You know, Jesus laid in the grave for 3 days and was raised again. We see 3.5 and 3.5, and I'll just go with, it's still threes, right? So I kept seeing these threes, and I'm like, there's got to be something about threes. Because we look at sevens, and we kind of understand sevens. And we understand that because of Genesis, right? What 7 means? It means completion. It means a fullness. 8 represents a new beginning. Why does it represent a new beginning? Because of the festivals. They celebrated the 8th day as a new beginning. Because of what it is, we all know there's only 7 days in a week, right? After the 7 days, then there's the first day again. It's a cycle. Well, the 8th day has this idea of extending the 7th day to begin something new and being a creation. So we look at 8 as this thing of new beginnings. So, but threes, what is 3? So I've been asking for years about these threes and really couldn't find anything. And I have to tell you, this is what I'm going to share with you. It's very hard to find this. And I told y'all last time, if you want the information on this, Dr. Michael Hezer, here we're going to give you, is the one that when I found his stuff, I was like, this is what I've been looking for. He has a master's in theology.
He's a college professor. That's how boring he is. Okay.
He is very boring to listen to.
But he's on YouTube.
That might be I before Eve. Derek Gilbert. Oh, Gilbert. And he's with Skywatch.
Which is on Roku if you have it.
And he's got a lot of videos on YouTube too. Some of them I didn't care for that much, but where he talks about his book called The Clash of the Titans was fascinating. So anyway, this is where I got a lot of this information I'm going to share with you guys, is these two guys. But I also went back and what I was studying last night, because I'm weird. I was reading on ancient text and their beliefs, their religious beliefs. And ancient text even, okay, this is where it's going to get weird. Before the Bible was written, even the Torah was given. It was the things that people believed before their writings and their teachings, okay? Before the Hebrew book came out. Because everybody gets kind of weird with me when I tell them, why are you studying that? Well, it's what people believed before that. And here's one of my arguments. Abraham, where did Abraham come from?
Yeah.
Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
What are we told about Abraham when he left? Way before he even left.
Well, he worshipped
the land.
multiple gods.
His father worshipped multiple gods.
Well,
And Abraham did too.
Yeah.
And they had, was it an idol business? His father made idol worship, idols,
Yeah.
false gods and stuff like that. So it was, let me see if I can get this right. It was a pantheon, is that the right word?
That was
Where they worshiped multiple gods, pantheon. So in Mesopotamia, in Assyria, in Samaria, they worshipped false gods, multiple gods. But Abraham knew of the God of Israel. He wasn't called the God of Israel there. He knew of the one true God in this multitude of other gods. And he knew he was more powerful than the other gods. And that was the story. Remember the story about the idols and his father came in? Did y'all remember that story? And all the idols were bowed down. And one of them, and he said something about maybe they were fighting. I can't remember how that went or something. Anyway, that's what was going on at that time. So when you look at the ancient writings from back then, the writings of Sumeria, if y'all look up, I believe that's right, might not have an A. Sumeria, oh gosh, I just said it while ago, Mesopotamia, Assyrian.
Yeah, spelling sort of challenge.
And there's a Y in there somewhere.
Mine
Okay.
too. I can't do
And
Sumerian.
here's the main one. Hey, Bill. Oh, there's no R. Ugarit. Ugarit. This is the main one that I was reading last night. It's one of the top ones. And what does these talk about in their religion is they talk about these multiple gods. We're familiar with Greek gods. What word am I looking for? Mythology. Zeus,
Thor.
Thor, Dionysus, I believe is one. Hercules, oh gosh, I can't think of any others. Artemis. Yeah, Artemis. We're kind of more familiar with those because of that Greek culture. We kind of come out of that Greek culture. We're taught some of that stuff in school. But these other places had different names for these gods. Gilgamesh is one of them. And I believe Gilgamesh came out of Assyria. And I know I spelled Assyria wrong. It has a Y in it. But you have Gilgamesh. I'll write these down if you want to. Of course. I may spell them wrong.
It's called invented spelling.
Yeah.
Gilgamesh, Marduk.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing that one.
Yeah, Marduk.
What is the other one where they're Molech?
Now these are like in the Bible, right?
Molech is in the Bible for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
That's the one where they sacrificed their children to idols.
That wasn't that with the Moab people in Moab?
Could have. And here is some of the argument that people will say, well, they're all different names, they're all different gods. No. What happened is this, we've said this before, at the Tower of Babel, they all spoke one language when they were building the Tower of Babel, right?
Right.
Well, part of building the Tower of Babel, Nimrod he was the leader, king, ruler over that area. He was the one leading them to be in rebellion against God. So that's where a lot of this worship, and there's deeper stuff that happened at this time too. That's where a lot of this worship of these gods started. It was in Tower of Babel. So anyway, when God dispersed them and changed their language, all the names of the gods they worship changed too. Because when you look at Gilgamesh, Marduk, and Molech, they all kind of have the same stories. Does that make sense? So when you read these stories about these different gods, little g gods, they all sound similar. And so here's a lot of the argument people will throw out there, because this was part of what I was reading last night. They're all similar because it's all made up. It's all myths. People had to make things up to figure out what was going on. I don't believe that's true. Because the Bible tells us that there were fallen angels, there were false gods and pagan gods that were being worshipped. And I believe that they were real beings that were created by God, that fell and wanted to be worshipped as God, and they lost their estate, is what we've been told in the New Testament. God took away not their power, but their rulership to be in the place that he put them in, right? Because he put them over nations. That's what it talks about in Deuteronomy 32. God put these beings, created beings, over nations, but then they fell because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So just because they are spirit beings and they are powerful doesn't mean that they're not real. Just because we don't see them doesn't mean they're not real. And so anyway, am I losing anybody with this?
Now, with that, if you may interrupt, with that right there in the study of all these different gods and how they got their names, it's not a book you want to read, because I forget what that was. Every one of these powerful beings created miracles in their own people's eyes. Mm-hmm. People that had multiple births, that couldn't have kids. I can go on and on and on about all these things. Mm-hmm. But it all went the other way.
Yeah, because their power and the people who worshipped them went to their head.
Yeah, there was miracles going on with the power of those people, but it all went away.
These beings were given powers by God because they were created beings by God. And when you read Enoch tells you that they taught humans to do things they weren't supposed to teach them. Mm-hmm. And so there was, one of the things they taught them was about war and how to make weapons. Another thing that they did, let's see, who should I say, is eating human flesh. Mm-hmm. And I say that because I don't want you to think that that's weird, because we're going to read further on in Revelation that that's going to be done. Drinking blood.
It's already happening. Over in Iran and Iraq, they're already doing that.
It's been happening.
Christians.
Yeah.
They're killing the Christians and then
and
drinking their blood. And
why are they doing that? You know, that's the other part. Why are they doing that? Well, if you read this, they were taught this by these beings way back. It's not something that ISIS went, hey, we can really get at them if we drink blood and eat their blood. It's been passed down a long time ago, and it's being influenced spiritually. We have to realize that there's those forces behind the scenes that are influencing things today. So anyway, I want to give you one more name.
Baal.
Baal. That's the way you say it in Hebrew. We say Baal, but Baal is another one. That is one of them. The reason I bring this up, because if you go to the Ugarit text, this is the name you're going to see. This is the name we're a little more familiar with. But Gilgamesh and Baal is basically the same being. Does that make sense? Because the stories are very similar of who Baal is. I'll share this really quick too. The worship of these beings was all centered around fertility and agriculture, harvest. Okay, just like in Greek mythology, there's this idea that certain gods would go down into the underworld, and that would influence the earth. When they would go down into the underworld, the world would go into a place of winter, and things wouldn't grow. There'd be less rain, blah blah blah. So they viewed, and again, the gods wanted them to worship them. So there was this worship of, if we do certain things, then the gods will come back, and the land will be fertile and grow, and we'll have agriculture, and we'll be able to eat, and we'll have water. But there was also fertility, not only the fertility of the earth, but fertility for mankind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it was survival. I mean, they needed those to survive.
Yes.
To carry
It was
on.
highly important to them. So these gods ruled over them with this, right? I want you just to see this, is they ruled over them with this: offer your children to me, and the blood of your children will pour out, and I'll bless your land, you know? So the people would go and offer their children. And that's why it talks about in scripture, it talks about sending the children into the fire. That's what they were doing. They were sending their children into Gilgamesh and to Moloch so that they would have better crops. One of the books I read was, I think it was Derek Gilbert's book. He talked about there's places, archaeological digs, did I say that right? Where they've gone in and they found not cisterns, what do you call them, like containers of ashes of children, just buried, tons and tons and tons of these vessels holding the ashes of their children. So there's part of these people believed if we offered this sacrifice to these gods, we'll get a benefit from it, but they still buried these ashes. The children were still precious to them. Does that make sense? It's like they're doing these burial rituals, but yet they did these sacrifices to these gods as well. Okay? I want to talk real quick about Baal. But anyway, a part of one of the beliefs of Baal was that he was I want to say a lesser god. Remember, he's still a god. He was a lesser god and wanted to be worshipped as a greater god. The god that was over him was named El. I just find that interesting well, El is one of the first names that you read about God in the first part of the book, but they didn't know God's name, so just you have to remember that. Because the word El just means God. It can mean big G God, or it can mean little G God. Let's see, do I remember what Baal means? I don't remember right now off the top of my head. Maybe it'll come back to me. But anyway, I do too. Thank you, Lord. You're good. Baal just means Lord or Master. Okay, that's all that means. That's the, so anyway, he wanted to be, and he had a mountain, but he wanted his mountain to be. His mountain is called Mount Saphon. Our God's mountain is called what?
Mount Zion.
Mount Zion.
Copycat.
It's the one true mountain. And so he wanted his mountain to be bigger. I mean, does it start to sound familiar of who Baal is? Anyway, the story goes is that he was in a battle against, and I am not giving you all of this because there's also missing pieces. They don't have all of the written text on this. So they'll say, and then it's broken, and then it starts up, so. But there was another god that fought against Baal. His name was Mot. He was the god of the underworld. of death. I bring this up because what do we read in the Abyss and Apollyon and death coming out? And remember the fourth horse,
Yeah.
his name was Death. No, yeah, and Hades followed behind him.
Hades
What is
all behind.
Hades?
Yeah.
Hades is the underworld. When you read about Satan being cast down, where it says, and Satan was cast down to the earth,
Yeah.
right? The word for earth in Hebrew is called Eretz, E-R-E-T-S. And what that can mean, we just think of earth like earth,
Yeah.
but it can mean underworld. So Satan was this glorious angel, right? Who worshiped God. He was in the garden. He was a shining one. He was a beautiful angel, but when he was cast down because of his sin that was found in him, he was cast down not only to the earth but to the underworld. So that's where we get this idea that Satan is the god of hell, right? He's the god of the underworld. So anyway, when you read these stories, you see this other god who fought Baal over the underworld. Baal was taken into the underworld, and let's see, what else? Oh, I know what it was. And they wanted him to come back out. He had to come back out because of this agriculture. We gotta have things growing. We gotta have the land fertile, and so he has to come back out. So there's a picture of Baal being resurrected. How many days? 3 days. 3 days. So he's resurrected. He's brought out of the underworld in 3 days. There's also the Raphaim. I know you'll like this. Is associated with Baal because when he comes out and he's resurrected, he brings the souls of the warriors called the Raphaim with him. And there's this idea that he's going to create a banquet, and the souls of the Raphaim, the souls of the warriors, are going to come to the banquet created by Baal to eat at the banquet. And they will be given life again. So not only is this worship of this fertile fertility and agriculture, but part of this worship is of resurrection. There's this picture of resurrection. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Starting to see the picture
Parallels
a little bit?
with the marriage feast of the Lamb.
It's all parallels. So I'm going to try to do this because we're 10 over. I'm going to try to do this real quick, but we have to. We'll talk some more next week about this. So again, we say parallels
Yes.
with this, and it's true, that Satan's always been a mimicker. He's a mimicker of God. He wants what God has, right? And he wants to be established. I'll tell you this too. This word Saphon in Hebrew means north. It's the mountain to the north.
Mm.
So when you read things about how they were fearful of being attacked from the north, you also read in Daniel about the north king and the south king. This is part of this picture that they had. Baal's mountain was to the north, right? It's in Syria. It's on the coastlands of Syria, close to Tarshish. Not Tarshish. No, not Tarshish. What is it? Sorry. What is it? Tyre?
Tired.
Yeah.
Tyre. Thank you.
Tyre.
Sorry. Tyre. It's close to Tyre. And you start to see some of the things talked about in the Bible about Tyre, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why. It's because this is all centered around this place of worship of Baal. All right. So what was I saying? Help me get back on track. I got off track.
Parallels.
The parallels. So we think of it as parallels. The Satan is a mimicker of God. So we think when we read these stories where God says certain things and that Satan's mimicking him. All right, this is actually what's going on. So when God says things like, I will cast down your mountain and I will build up Mount Zion, here's another one. Baal was said to be the god who rode on the clouds. He was the cloud rider, And that's what they worshipped him as the cloud rider. So what in Daniel 7 is when Jesus appears? It's not called Jesus in Daniel. It's at 7 or 9. I think it's 9 now that I'm saying that. When he appears, remember the Ancient of Days? Remember Daniel sees this, the Ancient of Days said, I'm just throwing a white beard and all that. And then, I forget how it's worded, but when Jesus comes in, Son of Man, and he's shining, and he comes in riding on the clouds. What is really being said, when you read these things in the Bible, what it's saying is God is saying, I'm taking that description. Because you are not the God that rides on the clouds. I am. So everything that these gods claim to be, when we read it in the Bible, God's going, you are not that, I am that.
He's already
I
good.
am that.
Wow.
Well, he's saying, I am over you. I have cast you down. And I'm taking back every description that you claim to be. So when they claim to be the gods over the land and fertility, God goes, I'm the God over that. I rain upon your lands. I bring you the rain. I bring you the seasons. You see what I'm saying? Because they say, offer your children to me and we'll give you rain on your land. God says, I'm the rain on your land. I'm the dew that comes in the morning. He's claiming authorship over these gods that people have worshipped. And he's saying, I'm greater than this. So, here's my presentation to you on the 3. So we see this link of this worship for resurrection in 3 days, right? That they claim that Baal or some of these other gods will be raised in 3 days once they go down. God's claiming he did it with Jesus when Jesus was buried in the earth for 3 days. And you could say even all the way back to Jonah, right? That God is saying, I'm the one who resurrects in 3 days. I'm the one who has the power to do this. They do not have the power to do this. And so when we read in chapter 11 these description of these witnesses and the power that they've been given, he's saying, I'm the one who resurrects. I'm the one who brings up the dead in 3 days. And I'm going to give that power to my chosen people. Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit. And that's what we're seeing in chapter 11. He's claiming to conquer all things and to be the God over all things, even over these false gods. And what they promise. Does that make sense? Is this out there for you guys?
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It's fascinating. To me, this brought it all together. You know what I mean? Because I believe this wholeheartedly, the Bible. I believe what God says in it, and I know it's his words. But there's some missing pieces for it for me. You know, it's not missing enough that I couldn't find salvation. I'm not saying that. But I knew he was God, and I knew Jesus was sent for me as my Messiah. I knew that with that. But there were some things that I just didn't quite make sense. And now all of this is filling in those gaps. Why did God say it? Why was that important for him to say that? Why was that important for him to do that? And it just helps me to understand a little bit more. So I'm offering it to y'all too, if you want it. If it's too weird, too scary, you can, as Pastor Jim used to say, put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
Or I always say, if you don't want to put it on the shelf, you can throw it away. I don't care.
Darren Gilbert and Tom Horn have reported that a monument to Baal has been erected or is in process.
No,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
been erected in Washington.
In Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's really,
You can ask people go there and
Washington,
worship.
D.C. or
Oh, yeah.
Washington State?
And the
Washington,
sacrifices
D.C.
are the blood
in-
sacrifices of babies.
In a
That's what drives abortion.
park
I
there,
heard.
people, you can actually, if you look it up,
Huh.
I forget what, do they call it the Tower of Baal?
they changed it.
Did they?
See, because when they first started, because here's what happened. Jonathan Cahn talks about this a little bit, about how when certain things happened in the White House, that the Tower of Baal fell because Saddam Hussein was trying to rebuild it.
Yeah.
And then when ISIS came in, it fell. because they were destroying anything, whether it was pagan or Christian.
Yeah.
They were destroying any type of religious relics,
Yeah.
you know.
So they
monuments.
destroyed it.
They
ISIS
destroyed it. So what they did was, is all of a sudden, because he talks about the spiritual significance of that being destroyed, but then people came in and decided they were going to resurrect it. So they used, this is my understanding, if I'm wrong on this, correct me, but they used, what is the copy machine that's 3D?
Yeah.
And they started making copies of this, so it's 3D pieces, and they started putting it together. And they called it the Tower of Bel. And they were going to open it up in, was it Paris or London? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
And people came against them. And
You're too stupid to come against us.
so, well, they changed the name of it.
Yeah.
So everything went quiet. They weren't going to do it because they were going to do it around one of the
I think it was London. Yeah, one of those G
meetings.
meetings.
Yeah, one of those. So it probably was London. Now that I'm saying it. And I mean, they shut it down because people were just rising up against it. And then they came back later. And I'm trying to remember what they
ISIS,
called
is
it.
it something with ISIS, isn't it? Now it's the ISIS.
No, they've given it a
I've
different name.
I've seen videos or pictures of people, doing the yoga stuff in front of it, and it's up there, and people are.
So now what they're doing is they're sending it all over the world. And they've chosen certain places, because Washington, D.C. was one, but they sent it to Dubai, and it was open there for a while. They sent it somewhere else, I can't
So
remember.
it's movable.
Yes. And they've only been sending it to places of financial importance, political and financial importance.
And who's they?
I don't remember who's putting it together with this. The arch,
Interesting.
the
Do you
archway,
remember-
it's called the archways of Babylon or archway of something.
I probably wouldn't call it
Yeah.
Babylon.
Yeah,
I
probably not.
I still think ISIS was associated. I mean, when I say ISIS, I'm using the wrong term.
Yeah.
The ISCES. Anyway, it's a goddess. Anyway,
It
what was
started-
it?
ISIS, yes.
Oh well, no, that's not. I'm
But
sorry,
they're
that's
calling
not
it
where I was
archways.
going. I was saying the wrong word. Remember the Norway thing? Did they raise that up in Norway? There was a Norway video where all these people were doing all this idol worship going on during one of these G
And
conferences.
again, I'll state this because we're really over time. I'll state this because I wanted to end with this. The spiritual effects, and it is just like what you said. Everybody looks at the archway of whatever they're calling it, or the that. Now I can't think of what it is. But anyway, we look at that and we think of it as harmless. Yeah, it's just a thing, but we forget those spirits that are at work behind that.
Yeah.
And so what I was gonna say is, just like today, what do we see? The spirits behind everything. The spirit pushing abortion is no different than the spirit that says, come offer your children to me,
It's a spiritual battle. Ephesians.
It's still a
we fight
spiritual
against,
battle.
We fight against, right? We don't fight against flesh.
Yeah, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and rulers over nations and rulers over darkness. And so those spiritual beings that are still at effect. You can see it. You can see it at work today in our country as well as other countries. And so it's always been at work. And God promises in Revelation He's going to destroy it all. They're going to be wiped off.
Right.
Okay? Any questions?
All
right.
right. Stuff.
All right, thank you, Lord. Father, I just thank you for this. Father, let what needs to come in, and what needs to go out, come out. And Father, I want people to be at peace and confident and assurance of knowing that you are mightier even over all of these weird things. And we thank you that you have a plan and your plan will be fulfilled in the end. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Ruthie, we won't be there Tuesday.
Right. I wasn't sure you'd be here today because I knew you said you
We're
would.
leaving real early in the morning.
I will be there Tuesday.
We have We've got two of Patty's relations in the hospital. One of them's okay, the other one, they just left her open to die
Oh dear. Where's this bill?
in St. Pat.
I'm sorry.
So we can do a lot of running around.
Yeah, I'll be there.
I'm sorry.
And you're gonna sign up for